Hello, good afternoon. We are going to start, so please come in. Okay, 1 minute. Good. Okay, so I think we are sharp on time, and we'll make sure to end sharp on time. Let's start for this panel on decarbonizing transport with green fuels, which we all appreciate is a priority topics, be it in terms of climate or public health, and a topic on which over the last 5 to 10 years, quite a lot of brainstorming has happened. Also, some level of policy has been implemented. Some investments has been made, but there is still a lot to do. And what we also have seen is that there are challenges and headwinds to get there. Some are more of a technical nature. Some are more economical or social, and these two last ones can be combined because often, even if the technical solutions are there in that space in transport, different, for instance, to electricity production, it quite often still comes at a green premium. And then the question is obviously, who is going to pay for that premium? So here we are for this panel with four great speakers that I will let themselves introduce. And we will start with a 5 minutes kind of setting the stage with Dominic, World Bank colleague. And full disclosure, we just had before this session a very lively lunch with our panelists. Lively to the point that I was wondering whether the plates would start to fly. So I hope, in a good sense, I hope it will be equally lively. And I would encourage you as speakers to have the same degree of interaction we had around the table, which was really, really fantastic. So with that, let me hand over to each of you for a really very brief introduction about yourself. Oh, and I realize I have not introduced myself, so let me do that, sorry. I'm Bertrand de Laborde. I'm with IFC, so private sector arm of the World Bank, and I'm the global head of infrastructure, covering transport and a few other sectors. Very good to be here with you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rachel White. I'm the Global President for Clean Energy and Environmental Solutions for Ricardo, which is a strategic environmental and engineering organization.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sharvari Patki. I'm from WRI India office. I am leading electric mobility work in India. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Namrata Nadkarni. I'm the CEO of Intent Communications, and we are a maritime consulting firm, and we do lots of kind of stakeholder building and narrative construction as well.
Hello, everybody. My name is Christoph Wolf. I'm the CEO of Smart Freight Center. This is a global platform focused on decarbonizing transport. We are the standard setter for emission accounting and reporting in freight. So we focus on freight. We're Dutch-based, and we do this end-to-end across shipping, aviation, and trucking, and work with our 200 large multinational members, shippers, cargo owners, and the operators on low-carbon solutions.
Thank you so much. So let's go to Dominic for, if you wish, also to introduce yourself, and then we'll get from you this initial setting the stage. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bertrand. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dominic Englert. I'm a senior economist at the World Bank in the Transport Global Practice. And I've got two goals for the coming 5 minutes. I want you to exercise, and I want you to think, and it gets even worse. In the beginning, I want you to do both at the same time. Can I get everybody up for one moment for a round of inforobics? Fantastic. I've got 3 simple questions for you, and you've always have got 3 answers, 3 choices. You've got the shipping choice, you've got the aviation choice, and you've got the trucking choice. You let me know what you think. We start with the first question, please. Can you tell me which of these sectors needs to decarbonize most mobile assets worldwide? Is it shipping, aviation, or trucking? All right. I see. Oh, it's a mixed bag, I would say. It's a mixed bag. For those that bet on trucking, top. You got it right. 250 to 300 million commercial vehicles, most of them trucks, need to be decarbonized. Compared to these few ships and planes, still a lot, but that's easy peasy, I would say. Let's get to the second round of infographics. Which of these sectors is used to pay least for 1 ton of fuel? Shipping, aviation, or trucking? And please be considerate with your neighbor, so we don't want any casualties. Oh my God, I see overwhelmingly shipping, yeah? So it's my sector. Do we appear that greedy? Seems so. Are we right? Nico, you are totally right, yeah. On average, shipping pays the least for the fuel. There's also a reason for that. We burn the dirtiest fuel. We burn very low, heavy fuel oil. By now it's called at least very low sulfur fuel oil, but doesn't make it that much better. Last round of infographics. Tell me, which of these sectors can be regulated globally? Shipping, aviation, or trucking? Which one has got a global regulator? I see a lot of planes flying. Anything else? Oh, Aurelio, thank you very much. Aurelio is swimming. No trucks in the room. So Nico, please help us. Actually, it was a tricky question because two of these three sectors have got a global regulator. It's the International Maritime Organization in London and the International Civil Aviation Organization in Montreal. For trucking, there is nothing. This is nationally nothing that we can do about this. Many, many thanks. Please take a seat. That was the workout. Fantastic.
That was interesting.
All right. That was the exercising and thinking part. Now it gets easier. Now it's only thinking. Yeah? I want to share 3 key messages with you. The first one, please. I want to let you know where the green fuels that we're going to talk about, where's actually their part in the usual transports ASI framework, which stands for avoid, shift, improve. Yes, correct. Fuels, F. It's not in there, but it's still part of it. The fuels are part of the improve lever. The fuels are part of the improve lever, which actually consists of operational improvements, whatever kind of, we take better routes, technical improvements, we tune the engine, or fuel improvements. And that actually means that we have to think about something else than oil-based products. The best candidates at the moment is electrification and batteries. It is biofuels, or it is anything that is related to hydrogen, the so-called hydrogen-based fuels. And that actually leads me directly to my second question that I would like you to understand, my second message that I would like to understand. We are talking here generally about green fuels in shipping, aviation, and trucking. The respective communities would kill me, the export communities, because green fuels, what does this mean? We use more specific terms here. The funny thing is, there is no harmonized way of using these terms. For example, in shipping, we like to talk about the zero and near zero marine fuels. Aviation obviously doesn't want to have the word marine in there. What they have termed is the sustainable aviation fuels. And trucking is even easier. They haven't come up with one single term. It's just kind of any kind of alternative fuels. But what is important to understand is when we talk about shipping, we are talking mostly about biofuels or green methanol or green ammonia made from hydrogen. In aviation, once again, lots of biofuels, but also synthetic kerosene, once again made from hydrogen. And ultimately in trucking, the alternative to electrification is probably going to be hydrogen. That brings me to my very last question, and then you can get rid of me. When you look at the different decarbonization pathways, in the transport sector. We can look at passenger vehicles and we can look at rail first. And that's relatively simple. It's quite straightforward. We're going to electrify these sectors with battery support, obviously, or direct electrification, such as in rail. When we look at the other sectors that are of interest to us today, shipping, aviation, and heavy-duty road transport, this means trucking, it gets a little bit more nuanced, a little bit more complicated. In shipping, for instance, my personal view so far is, yes, we're going to decarbonize short-distance shipping, maybe along the coast, some ferries and so on. We're also going to use some biofuels, but ocean-going ships, they will likely run on hydrogen-based fuels, green ammonia or green methanol, as I said. Let's look at aviation. In aviation, we need energy-dense fuels. That's very important. Space and weight matters a big deal. So biofuels is the way to go here. However, most likely the quantity of sustainable biofuels available is not going to be sufficient to decarbonize aviation completely. So most likely we need the help of hydrogen-based fuels as well. And when we get to trucking, we see that electrification is also the way to go. However, there are some special circumstances in trucking. It is heavy-duty road transport. It means hilly terrain as well. It means long distances. It means we need to recharge it as quickly as possible. The trucker doesn't want to wait for 6 hours until he can continue driving. So therefore, most likely there is also a niche market for hydrogen-based fuels and biofuels to come in. With that in mind, I would like to hand over once again to Bertrand, and I hope that you're going to enjoy how our panelists are going to share all the possible solutions as well as all the possible challenges that we're going to have on that nuanced way of decarbonizing these three sectors. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much, Dominique, for this excellent scene setting, as well as the post-lunch gym. That was very much welcome. I think I'd like to perhaps start where you left it and hear the reaction of our panelists on the last slide. And in terms of technical solutions, and obviously it's different depending on the subsectors, what do you see as really the future? What do you see as a dead end or as a bridge, which should not be too long? And perhaps we can start by discussing about briefly shipping, and then we'll move to the other two sectors. So who would wish to go first?
I'm happy to go first. So basically, if you're looking at shipping, my company works on a report for the International Chamber of Shipping, where we speak to CEOs, C-suite people, and what we're seeing is a change in sentiment. So about 3 or 4 years ago, there was a lot of support for green fuels. There was a big move towards methanol. There was a big move towards ammonia and hydrogen, and active support for this. And over the last 2 surveys, where there's been a lot more geopolitical tension and there have been global recessions, we are now seeing LNG, which should have been a bridging fuel, the bridge is getting longer and longer and longer. And part of this, of course, is cost. Let's not be, ignoring business needs. But also part of it is familiarity and certainty. And I think certainty of knowing that you've got a fuel, knowing that you're going to have access to it no matter where your asset is going to be around the world, gives you this level of certainty. So right now, support for LNG is extremely strong. But I do agree that it is eventually a dead end. I think it needs to be a bridging fuel because the green credentials are not where they need to be. And I believe there's a very interesting World Bank report, Dominic, I just wanted to call it out, that you put out in 2021, which actually goes into far more detail than I'm allowed to do on this panel because we have time constraints and I want to pass this over. But I do think that there is support for methanol and there is eventual support for hydrogen that is in the mix. But at the moment, all eyes are on LNG, really, and biofuels.
Maybe just to add to that, I think fully agree. And I think what we're predominantly seeing with Ricardo's clients who are obviously thinking 30, 40, 50 years ahead is that really the concept of hydrogen fuel cells is very interesting from a shipping perspective. And yeah, that's certainly a longer term technology that we see there being support for. How we get there, I think, is the debate at the moment and how long it takes.
one last thing that I wanted to point out is, sorry, for people in the room not familiar with the life cycle of a ship compared to the life cycle of a truck, it's really important to keep this in mind. Sharavani actually said the life cycle of a truck is about 15 years. 7 to 15 years is kind of what you're looking at. We in shipping are looking at 20 to 25 years. The kind of investment you need to make and to lock in that investment and not risk a stranded asset changes the conversation at sea compared to land. That's it.
Okay, great. So I can now jump in with road transport decarbonization. When we talk about freight road decarbonization, I think we can break it down for simplicity into two parts, urban freight and non-urban freight. In terms of energy efficiency, in terms of technology readiness, it's fair to say that battery truck looks like a solution in short term also and in long term also. There are a few reasons to it. One, the operational requirements are getting fairly satisfied by the battery electric truck. In terms of technology, if we talk about battery electric truck are fairly good technology compared to ICE because the amount of power you get delivered at axle is fairly good. And the third part of it, which we have to solve yet, which is the capital cost. So if we are able to solve capital cost problem, then for urban freight, looks like battery electric would be the solution. Again, within that category, even if the capex is sometimes 2x or 2.2x, the reduced operational cost of the urban freight truck makes it actually a good value proposition. And once you cross approximately 150 to 200 kilometers, then you are already there making positive cash flows. So for urban freight, fairly we can say battery electric becomes the solution. In medium and heavy duty or long haul, it depends on which use case you're referring to. If you have predictable use cases where routes are predictable, schedule can be managed, payload is something which you can live with, then fairly battery electric again wins hands down. But heavy duty long haul, I see a why there. One path goes to battery electric with either battery swap or fast charging, because asset utilization is the key when we talk about road freight asset. Hydrogen could be the solution, but it comes with a caveat. You need to have infrastructure. You need to solve the cost problem, because the cost problem in hydrogen, it's much more worse than even battery. So I think one part of the puzzle is getting solved by battery electric. Increase battery density, reducing battery cost across the globe is slowly making battery electric more and more attractive. And it depends on use case, but it's the value proposition which is winning in urban freight.
Christoph?
Yes, maybe building on what Shavari was saying, so if Dominic had drawn his chart like a few years ago on the trucking side, he would have probably said battery electric and hydrogen equal size, yeah, like 4 years ago. Now he already said it's battery electric and small hydrogen. I would actually state the case for hydrogen was getting smaller by the year, yeah, and that has to do with the battery density technology improving. And if you can simply see what the OEMs do, yeah, so they they're maybe putting a battery a hydrogen truck there in an industrial fair. There's very little happening on the ground. Yeah, so I think while there is lots of models on electric trucks, on hydrogen trucks, there's almost nothing. So my prediction is that the niche will be very small, and it will only happen in places where you already have hydrogen. Now, I think we haven't touched on aviation yet. So aviation is. I think there's a convergence of aviation. Yeah, so it's sustainable aviation fuel. That's obviously a category that can include different pathways. Yeah, so there's a biofuel pathway. There is an e-fuel pathway, or a PTL, power to liquid. Again, different terms being used. And I think the hydrogen is I'm not sure. I mean, Airbus said they wanted to do 2035 hydrogen plane. You have to redesign the full plane. It's a fully different plane. I think they now moved it out to rather 2040 or 2045. Yeah, so it's actually going into distant future. So if you look at IATA or the ICAO's roadmap, there's all sustainable aviation fuel, and within that, a short-term technological readiness level 9 or 10, it's actually a biofuel, and this is it's always a food for this fuel. So it's waste-based fuels, waste-based fuels that are commercially available. They cost like a factor 2 more than kerosene. You can blend it organically, and the other solutions on the towards e-fuel power to liquid are more at the technology readiness levels of 5 or 6, not scalable yet. But I think will become relevant probably post 2035. Until then, we have to work with biofuels, knowing that the supply side will be a problem. It will be limited supply because there's limited waste on this planet.
Thanks a lot. Perhaps let's dig a bit more on that question on shipping, where, if I hear well, there is a consensus between you on the fact that, and that's music to Dominic ears, that this LNG as a transition in shipping should really be a bridge and not a too long one, and that hopefully at the end of the bridge, the methanol ammonia solution is a viable one. But still, for now, it's a very slow ramp up. What would you see as measures which could really help to accelerate this ramp up?
So I think, and I just wanted to, a point that I missed out was, and I liked your kind of distinction, there is room for electrics in shipping, particularly for coastal shipping, because it's about access and batteries. But for deep sea, you need really power dense stuff because you need to be dealing with bad weather. You need to make sure that your cargo and your humans on board your ship are able to return safely. And also, we don't want to harm the environment. So there are lots of considerations that you have to put into place. And at the moment, people are hedging their bets. We have dual fuel ready ships. We've got people looking at hybrid solutions. People are genuinely and actively, enthusiastically exploring wind power as a kind of to shore up using this fuel. But and at our lunch break, one of the big things that we talked about is energy efficiency is not as explored as we need it to be. There is so much more that we can do there to kind of reduce the amount of fuel you're using, which will help you manage your costs as you're shifting towards these more expensive and in some cases less energy dense fuels, right? If you need less and you use less, you'll pay less, which is great because it's fewer emissions. The change that we're having for the first time in shipping that we've never had to deal with before, which I know road has had to deal with, is the public health concern. Shipping, you kind of go off to sea, your ship leaves your port, it's off in the ether. Now we're like, actually, all the emissions that you're having at sea are leading to higher temperatures, ocean acidification, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we know that this is happening and we are now accountable for it. We're in the spotlight, we're seen as the big polluter. So we are having to look at things like methanol, we're having to look at things like shore power, we're having to look at other solutions. And the real question is going to be answered in October at MEPC at the IMO, where we come out with the greenhouse gas target. We have a target. We come up with the mechanism to reach that target, which we adopt, and then everyone hopefully will enshrine this in their national law, and then we move forward. It's very, very likely that we will go towards things such as methanol and ammonia in the long term, and particularly green fuels. But there is an uncertain operating environment, and until that clarity is really set in stone, a lot of people are going to hedge their bets and just wait, because if you have limited resources, particularly if you're from a developing nation, you can't afford to invest in something and then have everybody do something else. I mean, we were talking about this, I'm going to turn it over to you. We were talking about stranded assets, right? You've got people looking at it. I can pass that over.
Yeah, I think, your question was about what needs to change. And I think that, what needs to change is we need those consistent standards. And once they're implemented, then that gives, all of the asset owners the ability to make those long-term investment decisions. So I think that is probably the most significant change that would help to accelerate things right now.
Regulation. And also costs coming down. So as technology improves and we can learn from land, that will help.
Okay. Any further reaction? Otherwise, I'll broaden the question. Shavari? Oh, sorry, Shavari. Sorry, I did not have my mic. Apologies.
I think just to build on what Namrata said, cost becomes the main trigger. I would come to regulation probably a bit later, but we need to understand that all freight companies, logistics service provider, are profit-making companies. In case of transition, we can't change their bottom lines. It has to be a better value proposition. So at the end of the day, it has to be a profitable business even after the transition. Just to probably give example, in case of India, just to get the math right, 55-tonner tractor trailer makes profitable or at least a good value proposition when the asset cross 9,000 kilometers per month. You won't believe last month, one of the shipper companies in India have clocked 14,000 kilometers a month. With that, they will actually be able to offer lesser logistic cost even than ICE. If we start managing our asset in such a way that asset utilization is tuned to cross that 9,000 kilometers. Of course, that 9,000 kilometer figure changes vehicle class by vehicle class. I'm talking about the highest 55-tonner tractor trailer. So it has to be a good value proposition. And just going back to the regulatory aspect, we need to tie things. And one thing which is absolutely visible from Dominic's presentation is when it comes to freight or road transport, we write alternative fuels. If we all feel the technology is ready, at some point of time, there has to be a policy clarity. Because in road freight, we talk about battery, we talk about hydrogen, we talk about ethanol, we talk about biofuel, we talk about LNG, plus we have incumbent ICE for 150 years. So if we are able to give value proposition and we are able to create that policy certainty and clarity, I think that will be very, very helpful. Many countries, as on date today, does not have their definition of zero emission truck. I feel let's start there. And I think other aspect of regulation I would cover in the next round, and I can hand it over to Christoph for aviation.
Yeah, keeping in mind that what you mentioned, and on the AFC side, I do see Sergey, our shipping link lead. We can relate to that on when it's becomes reasonably economically viable. Obviously, then we see a lot of traction, and in the shipping industry, we have helped and financed some of our clients improving the efficiency of their fleet, and this quite a lot is happening. Same in the airline sector. To some extent, that argument also holds for electric vehicle. But when it comes at this stage, at least to switching to green methanol or ammonia, that's where you have a green premium, which is really significant. With this kind of collective, headache of what we do with that, because we want to ramp it up. But how do we do that, especially at the time where, again, from a social and political standpoint, we are facing headwinds? Anyway, any thoughts on that? Particularly perhaps also for you, if you go back to the aviation sector, which is the other global one, where we need to have this international regulation, but easier said than done. Any thoughts, Christoph?
Before I go to aviation, so let me maybe build a few thoughts on the economics, just for, I think, for this group to understand, because we look at shipping, aviation, and trucking as in the kind of in the same way. So as Shari was saying, in trucking, first of all, it's always an economic decision. Before we go to policy and to finance as enablers and infrastructure, it's always an economical decision. It's basically global cargo owners, the likes of the DHLs, the Amazons, but also cement companies, and they all have different supply chains. But at the end of the day, they choose the mode of transport based on economics. And there's more in trucking. It's becoming, if you select the right use cases with the right characteristics of a lot of actually movement, sweating the assets, then it's economic today. In shipping and aviation, it's not economic. So I think there's always, that's by definition, if you replace a very energy dense fossil fuel with a green fuel, it's always more costly. So we now the thing is we have to bring in the green premium down. And in sustainable aviation fuel, the elegance in sustainable aviation fuel is, and it's different from shipping actually, you can blend it. Yeah, you can bring it in. It's the regulation in Europe is actually 2% in 25, and 6% in 2030. You can blend it, you can mix it, and then the impact on the basically the transport cost is limited. Obviously, but you need to find a mechanism to shift the green premium to those parties in the value chain that have the readiness to pay for it. So that actually is the question of intelligent market design.
Mm-hmm. I'm actually going to quickly jump in, and I would almost argue that we need to stop thinking about it as a green premium that needs to be shifted to consumers and look at it as a cost of doing business. If you have regulations that say we're going to level the playing field, everybody is going to have to use these green fuels, everybody is going to have to emit only a certain amount of carbon, and you will be taxed, or there will be a mechanism of some kind, because obviously I'm not a regulator, that will say, if you do this, this is the price you pay, and this will be utilized elsewhere, then it shifts this thought that you're being penalized, and it's just cost of business.
Broaden the question and make it also a bit more challenging. Because on that, moving to this topic of policy, particularly in that context, social, political, what do you see? And again, it may have to do with supply, it may have to do with demand, it may have to do through regulation, it may have to be through fiscal aspects. What do you see as really good solutions, and on the other hand, very bad ideas?
Okay. Compared to aviation and shipping, road becomes little concentrated within the national boundaries. And fortunately, we have one ministry, or probably 2-3 ministries, who are in a way calling the shots about policy and regulation. Just to probably develop the further on the 4 quadrant, what you mentioned, demand, supply, regulation, policy. It is always easy to probably start with incentivization, but right orchestration should be the bedrock when we talk about policy. Because you need to create early market. And for creating that early market, in a way, incentivization becomes that carrot, which gives confidence to people. And in a way, it is a market, it is a signal going to market from regulators or policymakers that this is where our interest as a nation lies. And I think energy security is one area which practically every nation is worried about. So that comes in the policy context. Supply side regulation, on the other hand, are difficult. They are technically complex, politically challenging, but they are effective. If we take example of California, if we take example of Europe, if we take example of China, we have seen that zero emission vehicle sales have jumped up when supply side regulations were exercised. But at the same time, will only supply side regulation work? The probably answer is no. Then right orchestration becomes that bedrock. And when we talk about demand side regulation are more difficult because the users are more diffused. When we talk about supply side, OEM are your target audience. But when we are talking about demand, it's every truck owner. And in multiple countries, be it case of India, be it Brazil, be it USA, approximately 60 to 70% of trucks are owned by small fleet owner who are less than 5 trucks. And today the cost is 3x. So it becomes increasingly difficult to deploy demand side regulation. So I think an infrastructure is something which becomes that golden mean where government can come as an enabler and get things done. Mm-hmm. It also gives very clear signal to market.
Okay. Christophe, you wanted to intervene?
Yes, obviously the regulatory landscape is different by mode. Yeah, so there is actually demand side and supply side regulation. If I look at aviation for a moment, and you can contrast, I mean, there's were two regulatory models. So in Europe, so there is actually a mandate on the fuel supplier. So the folks actually that bring the fuel to the airport, and to basically say at a certain point of time, and it's being ratcheted up, you have to provide a blend with X% of sustainable aviation fuel of a certain origin, and that's all clear to everybody, and that ramps up. That creates investment certainty. Yeah, so the big thing is in my mind, technology is there. It's going to be more expensive. It's more expensive, at least ×2, if not more. How do you actually finance the supply plans? Yeah, so this is actually the key thing. And one of the key, besides technological readiness, which for the biofuels and the waste-based fuels is more clear. It's actually offtake. Yeah, it's dependable offtake at a certain price. Otherwise, the financial model will fall apart. Yeah, and therefore, actually, a supply side mandate is the clearest pathway to scaling money investment into the sector.
Thanks. Rachel?
Yeah, I think your question was about what works in this context. And I think, we've certainly been involved in projects supporting the UK and the EU with their Sustainable Aviation Fuel Clearinghouse. And I think what those type of things do is creating that matching that everyone's been talking about between supply and demand. So it creates certainty for people that want to produce fuels. It creates certainty for the demand for them. And I think that is one of those mechanisms that can help technology to advance more quickly. The other project that springs to mind is the work we've been doing on green shipping corridors, and that's really about looking at the decarbonisation of the whole journey. So it includes the freight part of it, and it also thinks about what measures are appropriate for specific routes. So there's a couple of examples of things that I think are working, and probably need to do more of those kind of things.
Thanks. Maybe. I'm being conscious of time, and then we'll want to move to a Q&A with the room. Last question or topic on my end, which would expand on something you mentioned, Shahvari, which is, as we'll be moving in terms of policy, regulation, and so on, how, and it's particularly valid for us as a World Bank and for governments, how do we take care of the smaller players for whom it's going to be more of a challenge to adjust because of economy of scales, because of a number of things? How do we factor that in, both in terms of efficiency, fairness, and also obviously to avoid backlash?
I think equity aspect is one of the main piece of the puzzle which need to get solved when we come to road freight transport. There are multiple ways to approach that problem. There is no one silver bullet for it, but one, because in the technology transition, initially there would be difficulties. The capex is not yet solved compared to ICE. So can we concentrate on companies who have in a way money, muscle power to experiment? And like what example I have given earlier, when you start crossing certain asset utilization, it starts making basically business sense. So how do you use these early mover and big player to get, because by then probably charging infrastructure will be developed, then asset utilization becomes more attractive so that you try and shield your small fleet owner. And other solution, I think, will come from technology. How do we improve our battery technology to increase energy density so that the battery size keeps going down, which essentially means because 40% of the cost of truck is battery. So if you are able to solve battery problem, then you're bringing down 40% component. Secondly, can we make asset utilization better not on the based of vehicle technology, but at a high level, how do you increase asset utilization by optimizing your logistics chain? Can you reduce your dead kilometer, which are not essentially what we call it as a non-revenue kilometer? Because again, if we are able to minimize non-revenue kilometer, electric trucks starts making sense. So I think there are multiple phases to it, as per my understanding. And initially, the experiment will start from the bigger players, and slowly, by the technology gets mature, charging infra gets developed, we'll start pulling in small fleet owner, and there could be a financial solution.
Christophe, I know this topic is close to your heart. Anything you would wish to add?
Yes, I think Shari was saying the important thing. So fragmented sector, small fleet owners, especially in emerging markets and in developed markets, a bit more consolidated. So creating access to finance or to technology is the key thing. Finance, like asset management platform that rent out or lease out to a pay-per-use basis, are important. But I'd like to make one other point back to shipping and aviation. Yeah, so if you go to the ICAO headquarters in Montreal, you have in big letters on the front door, nobody left behind. Yeah, so I think for the so aviation and maritime are global sectors. Without maritime, there's no global trade. There's no access of developing countries to global market. Without aviation, there's no opportunity to exchange of people. Yeah, so I think both are, in my mind, very equitable modes of transport. Now you need to make sure that actually also developing countries, emerging markets where risk premium are much higher, can actually participate in this global industry, especially because most of the feedstocks come from there. Yeah, so most of the feedstocks come from emerging markets, and I think there's a big opportunity here to make this equitable, and it's mostly a developing agenda. Yeah, so we've done with this also again with India when I was at the World Economic Forum. What does actually in a sustainable aviation fuel industry mean in India? It means growth, GDP, it means energy independence, it means air quality benefits, all of that. Yeah, so I think there's a country case, there's a developing case in emerging markets for both greening shipping and aviation. I think that's actually a very important element of that.
Great. We have already...
Can I just add something really quickly?
No.
Okay. 5 minutes.
Sorry about that. We'll move to questions, and I'm sure you will have the opportunity in the answers to complement. So let's go, and as we are left with around 15 minutes, if you come up with concise questions, I swear that they will come with concise answers.
Sure, let me try. According to the estimate in 2020, the required upfront financing to alternate fuels or green fuels for the aviation is $1.5 trillion to $3.5 trillion. For shipping, it is $1.2 trillion. And for trucking, somewhere around $400 to $600 billion. My question is related. These are really huge amount of investment that we seek to just transform or the technology, adopt the technology, but transform the fleet. But operationally, you compared all of the modes. You gave us a very good picture of that they become viable after certain level of operation. But how we'll take care of this? How this will impact the upfront technology and transformation cost? How it will pass to the end user? This is my question. Thank you. And what will be its impact?
Okay, let me perhaps take one or two other questions, and then we'll try to respond them together.
Hi, my name is Tony Lindo. I direct the WRI Brazil Cities program. In fact, my question relates to an initial statement by Dominic. If I got it right, Dominic, you mentioned that biofuels would not be enough for the case of SAF for aviation. So I'd like you to sort of talk a bit more about this? Are you considering a sort of dispute of biofuels between, say, food and aviation? Because I feel the risk that at some stage, I mean, we'll have some pressure on food on that.
Yep.
So.
Okay, so that's question number 2. Question number 3, and then we'll pause after question number 3.
Hi, my name is Madalena Pruna. I used to work in global transport with IFC as an investment officer. And I've been thinking about onshore power or power shoring in the ports. And I think that's an interesting niche element in sort of shipping and energy. And I was wondering, okay, why aren't more ports electrifying in that sense, right? Why don't we see more batteries and mega packs in ports? And why don't we see more connection to the grids in the developing world or in the emerging countries? So I'm curious, about the timeline of that happening. I know Rotterdam just did that, and there are a couple of ports, right? So what's the timeline, and what can the World Bank and the IFC do for that?
Okay, so, and we will have a second round of questions. So Maria and whoever we are lined up, don't get upset. You will be able to answer your question because you are going to come with very concise answers. So we have 3 questions. Who want to go first?
I can answer the port electrification one because I have that information. Basically, depending on the size of the ship, the amount of power that you need, you're going to be competing with people on land, including your hospitals, including your industrial estate. It's not always easy. Additionally, there is regulation that requires a bunch of European ports to put in shore power, but there is no requirement on shippers to actually use that shore power. And often, if you're buying fuels and you're able to get them cheap, it is cheaper than electricity, so the costs don't stack. Concise?
Okay. Great.
I'll take the first one. He asked about how do we finance this entire transition, and one way to do it, which has been in a way tested, is supply side policies. So for example, if we are talking about road freight, can we think about average fuel efficiency norm, where the leader of the market, the vehicle manufacturer who is leading, generates the credit, and who is laggard on the market purchases that credit till the time they meet their norm. This is how we can reduce the load on taxpayers' money, because we can't keep incentivizing thing. And then essentially you're creating a market trading mechanism within a vehicle manufacturer, which can in a way make this transition possible. This has been tested. Of course, supply side policies need absolute contextualization when we are talking about global south, because they have their distinct challenges, but definitely they have been proven, and it's needed to deliberate on it.
Mm-hmm. Christoph?
Yeah, so first on the green premium, aviation, it can be mixed. We're talking about, at this stage, percentages 2%, 5%. Even if it was fully put on the passenger ticket, that would be 1% to 3% of the passenger ticket. In most cases, there is actually a whole toolbox of different policy measures. So if you, for example, bring in tax breaks for the producer, or if you bring a carbon levy on international passengers, and so on, you can actually bring this down to very small percentages, actually, which is in the fluctuation of what your ticket prices are anyway. So you won't even see it. Yeah. So I think it can be on aviation. It can be brought in a very considerate way. And the second question about aviation and food versus fuel. I mean, that's obviously that question gets always asked. If you read what ICAO's eligible fuels are, so. Or what the RED II in the EU are. So it basically tells exactly what kind of feedstocks are eligible. Yeah, and there's a whole science about it, like what kind of land is it, indirect land use change, and so on, life cycle assessment. So there's a whole science around that. Actually, I won't touch on that, but I think the one assurance I can give you, there's a lot of there's a big premium in the sector to make sure that there is no food versus fuel competition, because otherwise that would discredit the whole transition.
Yeah, and maybe just to add to that, I think the other point about the fuel versus food is which locations are you using, and some of the the demonstration projects are looking at land that isn't suitable for agriculture, and therefore actually you don't have a competition in that process. So we just need to create the right incentives to do that.
Okay.
And your big price number that you have, remember, that's total. You have time to get there. You can do it in phases. You shouldn't be intimidated.
While Maria and others, you can line up for the second round of question. Quick, Dominic, anything you want to add on your end on that question? And on my end, I have one quick thought.
You mean on the fuel question, yeah? The biofuels specifically, or just on the premiums. This is something when we are just talking about fuels in general. This is something when you actually break it down. For example, an imported iPhone, an imported jeans, an imported computer, or anything what you may need. The costs are marginal for us here in North America. For people in Europe, the costs are marginal. We are talking about some cents for a pair of jeans or so. However, this changes when we talk about bulk food and we talk about a whole dry bulk carrier of soybeans, of grains, of any other kind of staple food that goes to Africa and so on. Then we are talking about different things, and then we have to think like, really, what does this mean in terms of price increases? On the fuel question, the biofuels, yes, exactly. Even if we took and we analyzed this in a report in 2021, we took all the sustainable biofuels that don't enter in conflict with food security, that don't enter in conflict with land use and land use change and so on, which we all need for decarbonization and so on, for carbon storage. When we take this into account, it's not going to be enough to decarbonize the aviation sector at its current growth levels. Keeping in mind that we will also need the sustainable biomass for many other applications, just talking about bioplastics as well. I'm just talking also about power generation in some cases, heating, and so on and so on.
Okay. What I would add just on the first question and the magnitude of investment is that and it has been alluded to by several of the speakers, what we do realize, for instance, looking at what happened in the renewable energy sector, is that where you really want to get, where it's key is if and when it becomes economically viable by itself. And in renewable energy, that's where we really saw it, booming when we reached that point, in particular with solar and to some extent with wind. But you need to get there. You need to get there, and hence it's what you do in that period in terms of subsidy, fiscal incentive, concessional finance, regulation, and how you do it. Because one, obviously, you have limited financing and limited subsidies or fiscal space to do that, and also, obviously, there are social consideration, which is something for policymakers and us as development institution, which is a very interesting and also challenging topic. But with that, let's go back to our second round of question.
Thank you so much for this. My name is Maria. I'm with the Global Transport team at IFC. And one of the things that I focus on is the sustainability offer for our clients. So I just wanted to bring it back to your point about trucking, obviously because of the specific challenges that the sector faces for decarbonization. And one of the things that we found, of course, is that many companies need trucking. It's not their core business, but they need those services. And when you look at Scope 3 emissions, that's the biggest part of the emissions. The problem is they don't control those emissions because they contract, hombre camión, as we say in Latin America, so little truck drivers and operations that have one or two trucks and so on, right? And they're not able to make the financial commitments to upgrade the fleet and pay the upfront cost of like electrification, and they bear the risks of that technology going forward. You mentioned a leasing model. That's something we've thought about before. But I guess I'm wondering, if you have specific examples of this being implemented and working. I haven't encountered that. So just any guidance you have on how to make that work in those cases. Thank you.
Thanks. Next.
Hi, I'm a messenger for an online question. Ana News from Mexico, she mentions a deep sea port that's in development in western coast of Mexico. This question is directed to Christoph, but I think all panelists can answer. Is how do you integrate low and zero emission fuels in maritime transport and land logistics in the planning stage when a port is getting set up?
Okay. Last.
Hi, everyone. Andrea Pestarino from Rina Consulting, Italy. I'm managing a project called Engimonia, funded by the European Commission, and it's about ammonia, green ammonia for shipping. And the most difficult question we are trying to answer in that project is a kind of chicken and egg dilemma. Huge investments for ship owners to get the ships ready for these alternative fuels, green fuels. Huge investment for ports, for bunkering facilities. So who shall start first?
Great. Okay, thanks a lot. So let's go for this second and I think last round of question. Who want to go first?
I can go first and I can answer her question. Please understand that puzzle is not yet completely solved. But when you talk about off-takers for whom that emission, road freight transport emission, is sitting as a scope 3. So in a way, they do not have direct control, but at the same time, they have one major control where they feel that it's a good use case. Origin is known, destination is known, schedule, route, all those puzzle pieces are falling at places. Then only one thing which, to begin with, what they need is long-term contract. Because if the company who is giving the long-term contract is with a good credit rating, then even the logistics service provider can put that 3 times the money on the table because he has a surety. I think if we want to solve that problem, we need to look from every stakeholder lens. For shipper companies, who is the off-taker, they have to give long-term contract. For logistics service provider, he need to give operational guarantees. From a vehicle manufacturer perspective, they need to hold their product accountable to highest level of performance. From a charging perspective, they need to give assurance that charging would be available when it is needed, which will ensure that asset is utilized to the best level possible. If all these 4 pieces start falling in places, then organizations like IFC can come in and start weaving the contract in such a way that it becomes a win-win value proposition. At the end of the day, that has becoming my motto of working, that find value proposition which is win-win situation for all, and that is how we will take things to scale.
Christoph, Namrata, and then we'll hear Rachel, and we'll wrap up. And let's try to address the 3 questions.
Yes, so I think Chabri already talked about the asset mentioned platforms. I think this is on the financing side. This is all nascent, and I think the financing sector is getting to grips with the different risks out there. So there's a technology risk, there's a utilization risk, there's a residual value risk, there's a payment security. And there's a question on who is actually owning best which risk. I could give you a longer list by geography of those asset mentioned platforms that are all scaling up. So I think people see it's a business, and this consolidation, this kind of intermediate platform is required to consolidate the small and medium players for the very reasons you are saying. And I think this is becoming state of the art. I think this will be a significant industry. I think a lot of the financial players, both equity and debt, are looking at that. So I would be quite confident on the road freight side to do this. I think the question from the West Mexican port, I think it would be good if you look at where you are. The West Mexican port is in the global supply chain. So if you can make it into a green corridor, so because you got Los Angeles around the corner, so there is lots of green corridors. So there's a lot of trans-Pacific supply chain. Then you should think about the right infrastructure for future fuels already being part of the design. So that's actually, in my mind, the key thing. But I'm sure you will say more about that, won't you?
I will. For the online person, there's actually a framework that has been created. I was lucky enough to be the team lead for the group that created it at the IAPH and WPCAP, which is the World Port Climate Action Programme. We've created the port readiness level for emerging low carbon marine fuels, and it echoes the TRL, which you talked about, the technology readiness level. You go from step 1, which is what fuels are of interest to me and what fuels are an obvious win, and it goes all the way through to your competitive spot market for these fuels. And the intention is that you should be looking at everything. You should be looking at, you've got limited space at your port, so you should be making sure you get the most out of it. And that doesn't mean that you stick a finger into the wind and say, oh, ammonia is the answer. You actually talk to people who are going to be calling at your port. You say, what does your fleet look like? You talk to local people and you say, what kind of regulations are there? Is nuclear or no? Is ammonia too scary for you? What will people accept? And then you build it out like that. You build a roadmap, you build the win-win proposition, you make sure that your bunker suppliers are close by and are happy to contribute towards this. So you basically create this framework from point 1 to point 9, and you can just build it into the system. This exists, it's free, it's online.
Rachel, last words for you.
Yeah, last question for me was the question about, which comes first, the decarbonisation of the port or the fleet? And I think it has to be both together. And I think that's where we've talked about these holistic projects that link corridors together that will really, really help to do that.
Thank you so much. To be continued, but we are short of time. We took off on time. We are landing on time. So I hope you enjoyed the discussion. And again, as mentioned, to be continued. This topic is here to stay, and a critical challenge that we will collectively have to contribute solving in coming years. Many thanks to all our speakers, to Dominique, and to you for joining us.